So if we have like 20 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes of presentation, probably we will have some time for question and answers. Because let me check. It is, yeah, we have 1.5 hours. I mean, oftentimes, if 10 minutes should be enough, I believe, right? So if you can present in 15 to 18 minutes, we will have time for questions.
I will try, yeah.
Okay, inshallah.
If the time left is 5 minutes, just let me.
I will inform you. Thank you. Thank you. So welcome you all. This is Ahmad Aysan. I will be chairing and discussing the papers. It will not be a very long discussion on my part, so we will have some question and answers. We have 3 presentations today, and we have about 90 minutes. So what I propose is that if we can go like with 15 to 18 minutes of presentation, and then we will have some time for discussions, especially your feedbacks are very important, and I believe 15 to 18 minutes should be fine. We have 3 very nice papers on. Overall, the session is about COVID, corruption, and financial stability. The first paper will be presented by Ibrahim Guizani, the co-author with Houda, Haffoudhi, Financial Development, Corruption, Shadow Economy, Case of MENA countries. Without further ado, I propose let's start, such that we will have some time. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending my presentation today. Today I'm going to present a paper written by myself and my co-author, Professor Houda Haffoudhi, and about the topic, which interesting topic, I guess. It's about shadow economy in the Middle East in relationship with financial development and corruption. Actually, this topic, at least for me, is challenging because it is the first time to work on this topic. And I'm sure that your discussion, comments today will be very insightful for us to improve the paper. So let me start with presentation. So this is the plan. Just to give you definition of, let's say, the official definition of shadow economy, or we can call it unofficial economy or informal economy, so it has many meaning. According to OECD and ILO definition, all economic activities by workers and economic units that are in law or in practice not covered or insufficiently covered by formal arrangements. So this is the meaning of the informal economy. Just to give you show you some data about the size of, actually the size of informality is very difficult to calculate or to measure because it is something that we cannot see. So there are 2 ways to measure this size of the informal economy. Some people, some researchers, as far as I know, make surveys and try to go to make a field study. And for us, we are using another measure of size of economy, which is an estimated measure. We didn't estimate it, actually. We took it from the World Bank database. So, and there are, I don't know the method, but there seem to be a little bit complicated method. And on the basis of many indicators and many causes of the shadow economy, those who estimated this data try to use these variables to estimate the size of the economy, shadow economy in every country. And in the Middle East, the distribution of the data is, the data, you can see countries with high levels of shadow economy, like Tunisia, for example, my home country, and Egypt as well. We are in Egypt. So the size of the economy is above 30% of the GDP. So it's very, very important. In Tunisia, some studies said that it even can reach 50%. But at the same time, there are other countries who have levels of shadow economy that are comparable to developed countries, like, for example, Bahrain, Qatar, and even Jordan. So 20%. In Jordan, it is almost 20%. So the observation here is that there are disparities between countries in the Middle East, and the idea of this paper is to try to understand why some countries have low levels and some countries have high levels. Are there some determined or things that explain why some countries could succeed in controlling the size of the shadow economy? This is our observation. But we are going to look to two determinants of the shadow economy we think that might help policymakers to implement policy to control the shadow economy. First determinant is the financial development in the country, and the second is the level of corruption. But these two determinants were largely studied in the literature, but our contribution in this paper is we are looking to see how these two determinants interplay together. Okay, so the first part is to try to investigate how financial development, FD, and corruption affect the shadow economy, and how these two determinants can interplay together in affecting the shadow economy in the Middle East and North Africa. So there is a lot of literature in this field, and as far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, even there is no consensus in the effect of each determinant on the shadow economy. So there is no in the consensus. For example, about the relationship between financial development and informality, some literature or the intuition says that as the financial system develops in a country, as we expect that access to credits get eased and informality should shrink. But at the same time, other papers have shown now that even financial development can increase actually informality. About excuse me?
Financial development can ease the liquidity even individual who wants to set up the prices. That's encouraging formal or informal?
Informal, yeah. It's informal employment. Yeah. Yeah, this is what I said, that sometimes financial development formal.
Correct.
Actually, this is the opposite of the first, or should be the opposite. Informal employment. So actually what I mean here is that people try to not to stay uncovered. They get employed in the informally employed, and they say they are not covered by formal arrangements. They can get credits from banks, but they don't have an official employment status. This is what my understanding is. On corruption and shadow economy, also there is no theoretical consensus. Some papers, some theory says they are complements, and each one, corruption reinforces the shadow economy size, and this happens actually mostly in low-income countries, but in other empirical studies and theoretical studies have shown that they actually can be substitutes, in the sense that corruption does not affect the shadow economy and the formality. It is actually more related to the formal economy rather than informality. So this makes both shadow economy and corruption substitutes, not complements, as in the first point. And there is another literature that shows also there is a relationship between corruption and financial investment and financial development, and that's why we want to study here how both the interaction between two variables or two determinants can affect the shadow economy. So we are going to work on the data of most MENA countries, 21 countries, and the data, annual data between 1996 and 2018. And the data is the World Bank, from many international institutions, etc. Just here, I want to show you some data about, I put the relationship between the size of the informality and the level of financial development. You can see here during the period of study in the MENA region, you see that for different levels of financial developments, we can see in the same time countries with high levels of shadow economy and at the same time countries with low levels of shadow economy. So whatever for various low, medium, and high financial development levels. At the same time, the same thing can be said about informality and corruption. For low, medium, and high levels of corruption, there are many levels. You can see countries with low levels of shadow economy and high levels of shadow economy. So there is no, it's like there is two subsamples here. Countries, it's like the sample is composed of always two groups of countries. Yes.
How are you measuring corruption?
Actually, corruption is measured by some international institutions like Transparency International.
Okay.
Yeah, it's there are indexes that are based on perception. Actually.
Yeah, perception.
Perception-based indices.
You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, that's how I should go. So I have model to estimate and we want to learn in which we put these two main determinants and the interaction term between them in order to see how they interact. So on the whole data, we did many regressions and for different measures of shadow economy and corruption measures in order to confirm the results. We see that the relationship between financial development and corruption are negative, and we see that corruption actually reduces informality in the MENA region, and the interaction terms are positive for the entire sample. This means that there is substitution between financial development and corruption. In this sense, the marginal impact of one determinant is high when the other is low. So there is substitution. They reduce corruption, informality by their substitutes. This is what happens for the entire sample. There is a problem of endogeneity. I'm not sure if you are familiar with it. So we try to use lags instead of contemporaneous variables, and the results seem to be robust. But there is the issue of endogeneity is still very important in our study. We need to deal with it further. We divided our subsample into two groups, middle-income countries and high-income countries, and we find that the result in the middle-income countries are similar to the baseline results, but with high-income countries, the statistical significance disappears. So this means corruption and financial developments do not affect informality in high income countries. So this is the two subsamples I was talking about. We divided the subsample into two subsamples: highly corrupt countries and lowly corrupt countries, on the basis of the index. Higher than 0.5, we call it highly corrupt countries. What we see that for highly corrupt countries, the results are very similar to the baseline models, but with lowly corrupt countries, the result changes in signs. They are different. What was here negative becomes positive. Financial development in lowly corrupt countries has a positive impact in the sense it increases the shadow economy. This is the second point I was talking about. So informality in employment. And when we study, we divide the sample into two subsamples of countries with high financial development and low financial development. The baseline, the results are similar to the baseline models, but the coefficients or the importance of the coefficients become very low with the highly financial development countries. This means that somehow, as a country improves its financial development, as maybe these determinants maybe lose their importance, and other factors gain importance, take over on relationship with the shadow economy. So, conclusion, just to summarize our results, the financial development corruptions are substituted in reducing informal economy in the MENA regions. The marginal impact of increasing along one dimension is higher when the other dimension is low. Financial development increases the opportunity cost of seeking and staying at the formal sector because we see that corruption reduces shadow economy. We understood that this means that firms, by paying bribes, they want to stay in the formal sector and they want to escape punishment from the or prison or facilitate their business and stay in the formal sector. And financial development in lowly corrupt countries also has erased the liquidity constraint. If so, this is the second point I was talking about. Financial development in lowly corrupt countries has erased liquidity constraint of self-employed individuals. And these self-employed individuals represent the informality in employment I was talking about. This is my, this is here what I, okay, this self-employed work.
Self-employed that are not registered, they don't have a tax record or something?
No, self-employed, yeah, they have, they can get credits from banks, especially in countries with developed financial developments, though maybe they don't pay taxes or they are, etc. And they don't, yeah.
But this is not coming from the results, right? It is, you are not controlling for this. This is just interpretation. Are you controlling for the self-employed people?
Exactly.
This is your interpretation.
Or interpretation of these results, of the results
But
when I
controlling like the proportion of self-employed people. Or
no. That's interpretation. Because I want to explain why in lowly corrupt countries, as the country develops its financial system, as the shadow economy increases. This is what the literature says, but of course I agree with you. I'm not 100% maybe sure about that. Yes, that's because I didn't control for informal employment per se. shadow economy, what we observe from here is that the shadow economy is determinants are multidimensional in the sense that, and they are variable, and not in the Middle East, and they are not restrained to financial development and corruption. These two determinants are significant only in low and middle income and financially lowly developed countries. For high income countries, things change. And they are multidimensional in the sense, and dynamic in the sense that as a country realizes more economic and the financial and development and succeeds in controlling its corruption, maybe these determinants lose importance and other factors take over and gain importance. So that's why I said multidimensional and dynamic. It changes according. There are many other determinants, many other factors, and as you improve, if a country can improve its financial system and its institutions and the quality of institutions, still there are other factors that affect. There will be other factors that would affect the shadow economy in this country. So it's multidimensional. So thank you very much. I finished.
Thank you, Dr. Brahim. Just very quickly, we will get the question and answers. This is an interesting study. It is, as you mentioned, it's a classic paper, classic topic. But the classic topics have certain usual suspects, like modeling, like using yearly data, so these are the things that we used to do about 20 years ago, which is even more popular because of the World Bank. I worked for the World Bank for one of this governance report, but increasingly more it becomes much more difficult to publish this sort of papers. I will not get into, I gave my comments already on the Managerial issues and so on, but just for the interpretation, I mean, your interpretation, that result that is a bit controversial, and that is even more interesting. When you find an interesting result, actually, it is good for publication reasons, but it will be great to have some variables that you control for it, at least in the second stage. Okay, I found this interesting result, and then I control for informality and employment, and that could be one of the reasons, because the reasons could be many. It could be about modeling, it could be about sampling, it could be about econometric specific, everything.
Sure.
But these topics will be with us, and one thing always, inform, even from the very beginning, you say that whether the informal economy is good or bad. I mean, this is even an ideological question. I believe that informal economies could be good for certain countries. State capacities are not good enough, or there is kind of state capture, there is not enough democracy, and so on. So you are regressing something that we even don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing. So that's why in the interpretation part, or in the policy recommendation part, it's problematic. One dimension, just as a suggestion, to make it even more attractive. I mean, you can look at some cryptocurrency use or some fintech use. Fintech topics are quite popular. Probably, informal economy might be using more fintech companies, and this might be even better for the economy overall, for the efficiency and so on. So then the paper could be even more attractive for the current discussions. That is just a suggestion.
Interesting points.
Overall, it's a good start, and it's good to remember these topics. Philosophically, from my role of the state's perspective, and these topics will be with us for a long period of time.
Of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
If you may introduce yourself, it will go to me.
My name is Shoukry. I'm the economist at the University of Shoukry from Morocco. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's interesting on the topic of informal economy and corruption and financial development. I have just a suggestion about the estimate used to capture informal economy and
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
The estimate used as endogenous variable, it's based on the mimic approach, the mimic estimates. I think it has the majority of models, mimic models take into account corruption as a cause of informality. So I think there is, I don't know for the World Bank database model, what did they take as causes of informality, but maybe you can take self-employment as a proxy of informal economy and redo the estimation to see it's a robustness check. So maybe you can approximate informal economy by self-employment, and in the MENA region and the North African countries, the self-employment is used in many papers as a proxy for informal economy, for informal. Maybe it would be another substitute for informal size, as it is estimated by the mimic approach. Thank you.
Your point is interesting, and maybe it would help me to confirm what you have said. Rashad said is a control for self-employment and
I'm not sure actually. I know that there might be. Sorry, there is a data about self-employment or informal employment, but I will look for it. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I have more of a comment than a question. You were looking at your regressions results, which are fine, but you were looking basically at statistical significance and signs. So if it's negative and significant, we conclude A, and if it's positive and significant, we conclude B. Which is okay, but what an economist would like to know is how big is the effect? By how much would your left-hand side variable, in this case, change when the other determinants you have on the right-hand side change? And moreover, how many of these right-hand side variables are under the control of the authorities? Because some things cannot be adjusted or influenced by policy making. See my point? So it would be great if you can have the economic effect on top of the statistical result, so that we can understand by how much would this change.
I guess economic effect can be taken into account, and you can have a separate table for this problem. Certainly. You can take the average and you can see. Any other questions? Actually, it is just on time, so we may move to the next presentation. Thank you again, Dr. Ibrahim. The second presentation is going to be given by Ahmad Shahin. Please, Ahmed Shahin. It is crowding, growing during a global crisis, a cross-country event study of effect of financial and managerial decision on firms' growth during the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's long title, but you have 20 minutes or 18 minutes to go.
That was my master thesis. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, thank you. I teach at the American University in Cairo. I teach engineering economics, and I'm currently a PhD student at Cairo University. This paper was my master thesis. That's why the very long title, unusual long title. The idea is I was trying to see what was the effect of the first shock of the pandemic on firm dynamics. I brought the chair because I have a bad leg. I sit most of the time. So this is my very first conference. I'm eagerly looking for your feedback, because I would like to slash this paper in half and publish it in the Economic Letters Journal, hopefully, inshallah. Okay, let's start. First, some researchers like Ega, Viganola, Adian, and others found that the pandemic had a harsher impact on smaller firms and on firms in the lower income countries. Other researchers, such as Muzi Miyakawa, found that the pandemic caused less productive firms to be cleansed out of the market. You know about the Schumpeterian cleansing, destructive, effect. Banerjee found that the weak financial health, which is logical, will amplify the crisis shock. Buera, Bozio, and others noted that prolonged crises will dissipate, the first thing, will dissipate the firm's liquidity and will lead to a prolonged recovery period. Farid and Overwest warned that over-dependence on government, and actually my research confirmed that over-dependence on government support would eventually harm everyone, the entire economy. Haider, which by the way was my supervisor, Amin, Viganola, and others recommended that firms should maintain their access to finance to endure a crisis in general, but in their papers was about the pandemic in specific. So my research questions are, the first thing, what are the decisions that firm already took when they were first shocked by the COVID-19 pandemic? How were they able to grow? And this is the idea about it. How can you grow during such a turbulent time, during this global crisis? And what are the, and this is, by the way, the second part of my paper, which actually I will take it out and I will focus more into this part when I try to publish. What are the financial decisions that firm took to maintain their financial health? Okay. The data came from the World Bank. You said that you were on the World Bank. I love the enterprise surveys. Do we all know about the enterprise surveys? Should I say what is it? Okay. The enterprise surveys by the World Bank, and they created something called the follow-up survey in order to measure the effect of the pandemic on the same data sample that they first surveyed in the first. The survey actually, for people that don't know, it covers non-listed local businesses in almost more than 50 countries, if I remember. And by that time, by writing this paper, they covered 171,000 companies around the world. The follow-up survey, I used it to measure the first shock of the pandemic, and the survey, and that's why I focused on the surveys, the spanning from May to November 2020, in order to measure the immediate impact of the pandemic on these companies. I used the older surveys in order to get some specific characteristics such as age. I studied around less than 15,000 companies from 25 economies. Okay, this is my model. I used this exact variable is actually, I created it. I had to create. There were, and based on my literature review, my paper was the first one to measure growth using sales as part of the firm dynamics that I was going through. So, in order to see the growth of businesses during that the first shock of the pandemic, first thing that first thing that I measured was the liquidity change, the change in liquidity, which was actually the main effect. And this part in specific, I had to study it in deep. I took it apart and I created another regression formula in order to study how would this actually be affected by other variables. And the other variables were the managerial choices that the company made in order to affect the liquidity change, in order to affect the growth of the company. And there were these are the internal factors, and I had also other external factors, and firm controls and sector and country fixed effects. Okay. So the results were as follows. Internally, both decisions to change the liquidity level and the number of worked hours affect the sales growth positively and significantly. It has a large positive effect on growth of the companies. Deciding to decrease any of these two factors had a very harsh negative effect on growth. So, and I will come to recommendation later. 810, yes. Decision to introduce delivery or using online services or using remote work arrangement and other fancy things are not that significant. They were only significant, and I did the regression multiple times, and I did it by region, and I did it on the sample overall, and it was only significant in developed countries. Externally, sales, which is actually natural, the demand, if the demand decreases or the supply decreases, it will cause for the sales to decrease as well. The results indicate that receiving financial support or aid from the government is tied with only the companies that suffer decline in sales, only the firms that are in distress and prone to fail. Firms that employ large number of employees enjoyed a positive sales growth. However, firms that were categorized as large companies, if I am, for example, let's say Procter & Gamble, I know it was not part of the survey, but actually I have a comment on that later, suffered from a sharp decline in sales during the pandemic first shock. So, the most important and highly impactful decisions were if you encountered a global crisis, what should you do? We think that you should keep or increase your liquidity levels. You get your employees to work for longer hours if possible. Additionally, do not get rid of your employees. The large size of employees is actually a factor that will help you to endure the pandemic, a global crisis. Delivery was not really helpful in less developed country. Remote work arrangement as well. Online business activities also as well. And it would help firms to maintain its growth during the crisis. If the firm abandoned, it will not help. It will not help if the firm abandoned its already established product or service portfolio, which actually, when I come to recommendation, you should stick to what you do best. If you try to, in a global crisis, to change what you do in order to say, I'm going to adapt, you will be punished, and this came from the data. Firms should give attention to relationships with both ends of the supply chain, starting from the customer to the suppliers, because you need that. You actually need that in order to endure a global crisis. Firms that suffered during the pandemic were the ones that received government support, which is the case that should be, and it should be the government support should be dedicated to firms that are in actual distress and in need. Yes. Also, from the data, the pandemic had a negative impact across the world and slowed or hindered the growth of world's major companies, which are typically located in more developed countries, which also we found in the data. So in conclusion, the first and most important managerial decision for the firm to take, internal decision, when you are facing a global crisis, and this comes from the data, is you should slow down your non-operation spending and focus more on preserving and increasing your cash reserve. The next step would be to capitalize on the firm's manpower by maintaining their size and encouraging them to work for longer periods of times during this crisis. Additionally, additional managerial decisions depend on the type. It actually depends on the type of size or location of the firm, as I discussed many times before, and that the delivery service or the fancy staff are actually have more, not more, a little bit more of significance in developed countries. Firms should adhere to their established offerings and capitalize on their relationship with stakeholders along the supply chain and inside or outside of the supply chain. Also maintaining relationship with international firms through exporting is helpful to maintain liquidity in less developed, and this also from the data, it was much more helpful in less developed countries. The government should adopt a balanced approach in supporting their overall economy in order to maintain a healthy economy. In the hidden slides here, actually I'm done with my presentation, and if you wish, this is the variables and this is the regressions. It's not very visible. I ran many models, and in this paper I ran 35 models, if I remember correctly, and I ran the regression gradually. I keep adding variables in order to see if the result would be still valid, and it was still valid as long as I add variables. I repeated the regressions. This was for the whole sample, and I did it for also income levels, lower, upper, middle, and high. All of that actually according to the World Bank definitions, and actually I did it also for Europe and Asia, which most of the sample came from Europe and Asia, and only few countries, only 2 countries were from the Middle East. They were Jordan and Morocco. Jordan and Morocco, which also held the same, they had the same results as the entire sample. I think I'm done. Okay. Sorry, I'm worried. Okay.
Can you give some more information about your data set actually?
Yes. That's why
More micro approach.
That's why I had the paper here as well. Let's go to the end, page up.
Who has done the survey about the 7 kingdoms and how you like, when is it done? That's what we have.
Yes, here. Is it visible? I should try to increase it a little bit. So these are the countries. Okay. 20 was in Europe and Central Asia, 1 in East Asia, only 2 in the Middle East. And actually, I got a comment on that, but actually both the enterprise survey and follow-up surveys, at that time, it was in 2021, these were the only countries from the Middle East. And 2 countries from Sub-Saharan Africa, so a total of 10,000 firms that responded to the survey. What else?
So the timing of the survey is?
Yes, the timing of the survey, as I mentioned earlier, I started from May to November 2020 in order to measure the first impact of the pandemic. I did not want to do, actually, at that time, there was a second and third wave of the survey. And much later, I chose to not consider them because actually what I was looking for, I'm looking for the impact of the first shock. What companies did in the first shock.
Firm level evidence during COVID-19 is quite very good. I believe you find a very good data set and
yes.
interpretations. We have done one for Istanbul Chamber of Commerce for the case of Istanbul, but we don't have this many variables. So your interpretations seem to be much more interesting. Let's get some questions from the floor.
I'm really looking for questions. I need them. Yes. Okay. Let's. Okay. I did not actually explain.
No, just I have a question about the effect if you have the variable in your data set about the government subsidized, and their effects on the government, on the pandemic crisis, on the sales growth of the firm. If an enterprise or a firm is subsidized by the government, maybe it mitigates the effect of the pandemic on the sales growth over the period of the crisis. I don't know if you have this variable in your data set or not. Yeah.
I have a variable. That's why I kept talking about the government aid.
Yeah.
This were my variables. This, I don't know. It's very small.
Just in your model, if it's included or not.
It is
Good.
It is in the model.
Okay.
Receive the government aid.
And it has an impact on the sales, so it mitigates this effect of the pandemic on the.
It did not mitigate. It's actually it helped them not to fail entirely.
Okay. Yeah.
They did not drown because of the government, but it did not increase.
The sales. But if you estimate your model without this variable, maybe you have a result, and then if you add the variable of sales, you can have a different results mitigated by this variable.
Add the variable of sales?
No, your model, the first regression will be without the variable of government aid.
Here, I actually.
Good.
It's actually it was by the advice of my supervisor at the time that I should do the regression problem. So as you see, the government aid I added later, and it helped.
This is so it mitigates the effect of the crisis on the sales growth. It
did not increase the sales.
No, it did not increase, but it helped. Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
That's why in the recommendation we should actually give the government aid to firms in crisis.
Okay. Yeah, this is my point. Okay, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. It's very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I didn't introduce myself in the previous question, so I'll do it now. My name is Raimundo Soto. I'm from the Catholic University in Chile, and I'm also a graduate of the World Bank a long time ago. Anyway, so my question is the following. The COVID pandemic was an unusual shock. It was a shock to the demand of firms, and at the same time, it was a shock to the supply side of the market. I think the paper would benefit from having a model, a theoretical model, not very complicated and not very sophisticated one, but a model that would allow you to disentangle whether the shocks are affecting the supply side via the cost of the firms from the demand side, right? So if you were, for example, in transport industries, and the government banned transportation, public transportation, as they did in, I don't know, maybe 100 countries in the world, that is a demand shock for the firm. Costs have not changed, right? But you cannot operate simply because the government said there is a ban on public transportation. That's a very different shock than those faced by users of the transport industry, right? Which is a cost shock for them. So when you're looking at these results, it would be very useful to figure out if it was a supply shock, a demand shock, and how do you disentangle the two, which is a difficult thing to do. How do you separate the effect of the demand side from the supply side? That's one question. And the other is a comment. You're actually looking at sales. Sales, it's not value added. It's very different from value added. And growth is usually reserved for value added. So when you're presenting this, you should emphasize that you're only looking at sales, not at profitability. Some of the comments you made at the beginning were on profitability and not exactly on sales.
I was very careful.
Okay. I might have missed them.
Not the profitability. Yes, the growth. I use the sales growth as a proxy for the company's growth, but actually, at this point is valid. I mean, it's limited by the rate. The enterprise rate does not have it has really many variables, and actually I'm very grateful for it. But there are some variables that actually I was looking for. Actually, I had to, as I said before, I had to create the sales growth variable. I had to merge 3 variables into one in order to have this growth. This is regarding your last comment. The first question, I don't know if I will be able to answer it or not. This was my second. I'm very sorry. It seems I changed the page. Okay, I had a second set of. I had another regression model here. Regarding the liquidity change, I decided to study it by itself. Here, this one. Yes, this was a hidden slide in order to see what the financial choices that the company made affected the liquidity change. I chose not to present it for the time's sake. Part of the external factors was about a variable about the supply change and the demand change. So was this what you're looking for? But actually, how do I disentangle the term that you mentioned to separate between the two? How would I do that? Okay, I will look into that. I will look into that. Okay, I will look into that. Thank you so much.
It is more of a controlling both demand variables and supply variables problem. This is also, I agree actually that we follow in our Borsa İstanbul related paper this data. And also your interpretation about the liquidity is quite interesting. I mean, initially when the shock comes, that you said that it's better to stay
to hoard
liquid.
it.
But this might be good for the firm, but this may not be good for the economy. So there's a kind of
yes, there is a balance. To find the exact balance in order to have when I was writing that, I was looking to have some sort of policy impact. That's why I'm looking for your feedback.
It is what you found, and it's a good one anyway. I mean, what is good for the firm may not be good for the economy. Everybody might try to keep their liquidity on their own, and probably they postpone their payments just for prudence-related reasons. But it's a good result. Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you so much.
Interesting paper.
Yes, please.
I want to apologize because you are right. Just verify one information. I was wrong in the slides. It's not encouraging formal. Sorry, maybe it's my mistake.
So let's move to the next presentation. Dr. Ahmed will be presenting. Please, you may take your seat.
Good morning. That's strange on Friday morning and we are here and presenting, so things are changing. My name is Ahmad E Rashad. I'm from Anwar Girgash Diplomatic Academy in Abu Dhabi. And today I'm discussing the spillover impact on the real estate market, or the housing market more specifically, if we exclude the commercial and so on.
Could you raise your voice a bit?
Okay. And the paper is together with my colleague Mahmoud Farghally. He is at the Dubai Land Department, so he gets all the official data from the government. which is a big plus. So also I want to say before I start, I have another paper, very interesting one tomorrow morning. So if you like what you see here today, you can come also tomorrow. So generally global financial condition and US, especially these days, that the US monetary condition are important and has a significant impact on emerging markets. Generally, the impact is if it's driven by inflation and reaction shocks, it's found to be a negative one. There are some exceptions when it's driven by surge in the economy, then it might have less negative impact on the emerging markets. So as you may know that the GCC countries are countries that is pegging its exchange rate to the US dollars. And there are several wisdom in this. One of it is oil receipts. Its dependence on oil receipts, and oil is sold in dollars. And But on the other hand, when you peg your exchange rate, you are giving up your monetary policy to the US, right? So you are tying your hand. You are not having a control over the monetary policy. And the high lending rates, of course, can have an impact on the real estate market, and I will explain in details now when I go to the conceptual framework. So if you are following the news, if you are following around, if you are reading the Financial Times and so on, you will see that currently the real estate market is under pressure. The prices are under pressures from every corner of the world, from US to UK to Sweden to Norway. The US housing market is a bit under pressure, and part of it is largely by the central bank's hikes, one of the most centralized and synchronized central bank rate hiking, and its effect on the property prices we have been witnessing now. And 2 days ago, we have seen that the Federal Reserve has continued raising its interest rate, and the GCC countries just followed. So basically, tighter financial condition can weaken the demand for properties by making it less affordable, that you go to and take a loan out from a bank. Or basically also you can, if you are refinancing, if you have an adjustable mortgage rate, means that your mortgage rate is being adjusted according to the market condition, then basically you are under more pressure from your side. So here Dubai is a very international market in terms of real estate. I mean, the fact even that it's a non-tradable good, generally the real estate is something questionable when it comes to Dubai. It's really international markets, and I will show you more data now. So recently, something like 20 years ago, Dubai has allowed, and the UAE allowed foreigners to own properties. Before that it was restricted, and it has interesting city, stable currencies, advanced infrastructure, luxury and city attractions that attracts many people from across the globe to come and live in Dubai. And generally the construction and real estate together accounting for some around a bit less than 15% of the Dubai GDP. And as I said, the UAE country has been pegged to the US dollars to about 3.6 dirham to each dollar. And as I told you, when you do this, then you have to align your monetary policy with the US monetary policy. Otherwise, you have this policy trilemma. Okay? So it gives the stability and encourages people and eliminates the exchange rate risk. But the problem if it has an advantage, but if the macro conditions are not in a harmony, generally the peg is good. If the economic cycles of the countries are moving together, for example, the US and Mexico, generally they move together, so a sort of tango dance. And but if the two policies are out of hand, the economic condition is different. Then you have the risk of policy misalignment. So you might have a bit slowing down, but the US is raising the interest rate, and then you are adding more pressure on you, right? Then there is some also risk when the two economic conditions are out of step. So this is the pros and cons of aligning. So as you can see, the recent wave of financial tightening in the US have affected the property market worldwide, increased the macro instability, and from the macro prudential perspective, that's extremely important. We have seen the 2008 financial crisis, and it has started from the real estate sector, and has been the impact of the US monetary policy on the GCC economies has been understudied significantly, and I'm using the case of Dubai as one of the most important real estate market in the GCC, the biggest and the famous one. Yeah, so as I said, it has several importance. The study contribute as a property real estate sector is important when it comes to the macro-prudential perspective. Just to give you help you to understand more about Dubai economy. So this is, for example, the transaction, the real estate investment in Dubai by nationality in 2018. So you see here, so how the market is how much international is it? Huh? So the first column is a UAE citizen, and then the second investor, which is by amount that is similar to the UAE, is India, UK, the Kingdom of Saudi, Pakistan, China, Jordan, Egypt, Canada, Iraq, France. Very international, very dynamic real estate market. And as I said, the fact that it's non-tradable good, it's something questionable in the case of Dubai. Doctor. So
You mean foreigners can own a house?
Yeah. So the foreigners has been allowed something like 20 years or 25 years. They can own their house in Dubai, no issues, and that caused a big boom in the real estate sector after allowing this. So how the U.S. monetary policy may affect the real estate market in Dubai? So you have the U.S. policy instrument, which if it increased, for example, it would affect the UAE key policy rate or the IBOR rate by the UAE central bank. And then you had two impacts here, direct impact and a bit indirect impact. So as I said, in the case of mortgages, the cost of financing to get a new mortgage for a new house, now you will pay much higher interest rate. But if you are having a loan that is adjustable and flexible, also refinancing for the existing mortgages, also the cost will increase. So this is one channel. And also you have another important channel that I will focus on the paper on, the exchange rate. The exchange rate is extremely important as a monetary policy spillover impact. As I showed you here, how international, how diverse is the Dubai real estate market. So what happened, as we know, these days, the US dollar is the king, has been appreciating against all the currencies. I guess no single out country has been appreciating against the US dollars. And basically, I mean, to give an example from the case of Egypt, for example, so 2 years ago, before the COVID, if you have 4 million Egyptian pound, you can buy a small villa in Dubai, somewhere in, not in the downtown, okay? That will cost about 1 million dirham. But today, same amount to get a 1 million dirham, you need more than 8 million Egyptian pounds. So this 4 million Egyptian pound, maybe if it gets you a studio, then it would be a good. So the exchange, so the impact of the exchange rate is much more huge than the impact of the interest rate. So the impact of the exchange rate has almost doubled the price of properties, right? So you see against against the British pound, the dollar has appreciated, and consequently the UAE dirham and other GCC currencies. You see against the rupee, against the Egyptian pound, against the euro. All these currencies have been affected. If you are a cash buyer, then it just becomes more expensive if you have your savings already in your national currency, right? Because we have the case that people, investors, maybe they come to Dubai as a tourist, and then they like the city, and then they start buying a property, right? So the point I'm making is there are two channels. The interest rate, that is the most obvious, as in the case of the most countries, that people would imagine it's the biggest channel, but I'm stressing that the exchange rate, it is likely to be more important and more significant than in the case of the US interest rate, than in the case of the mortgage rates. Yeah, just here, if you see how the correlation between the US interest rate, the US discount rate, and the IBOR rate, which is Emirates Interbank offered rate, that is set daily and now is adjusted monthly. So it's obviously, they are moving clearly together. Yeah, so this is just some idea on the real estate transactions on Dubai real estate. So you will find that 2004 and 2008, when they open up owning by expatriates and owning transactions, owning houses by foreigners, you see Dubai has been benefited significantly, and then it's a bit, the market went to a slowdown with the financial crisis, and then with the increase in oil prices and so on, it goes up again, and then slows down, and then recently it has boomed in the last year. After COVID, some people know that taxes are coming in Europe, start to relocate. We have the impact of the war and people coming from conflicted areas and settling in the UAE. So that data and method. So as I told you, I get that data from Dubai Land Department on monthly transactions. So the number of houses that is being sold each month. I have a bit less than 100 points. So monthly. So each month the number of transactions that is being made. And even better, I managed to, we get it broken down by the type of transaction. So it means that whether it's a mortgage or whether it's a sort of cash transaction, right? So you go buy a property and you leverage it, or you get sort of a non-mortgage buyer. Such a breakdown could allow me a bit to make a panel data instead of time series analysis and eliminate the unobserved time constant effect, or the fixed effect here. And data on the US interest rate are open and accessible from FRED database. I use the Federal Reserve rate, Federal Fund rate, and control a bit control for the effect of home prices on housing demand. So it's, maybe I show it here.
For the data, you get the data from this Dubai Land Department. Do they give the average price per square meter or something?
I will explain now. Okay, so they have, they come up recently with something called the Dubai House Price Index. It's a hedonic regression methodology. It's not, your question is a bit more related to my friend, but what I knew, they have a sort of Dubai Price Index, right? So not for each house, but something aggregated, right?
Something aggregated and done through the hedonic pricing,
yeah,
for some qualities.
Mm-hmm.
Or it is just the average data?
Average, this one more like an average, but I'm sure they would have, I mean, if you want the price, I think it wouldn't be difficult to get. It's something that is something you can find, right? If not from the government, there are this GLL and others that they have some estimate of this, right? So they have an index for the price level in certain months and given months. They also produce a renting index, as owning a house is a substitute good for renting a house, and might be an important determinant to control for. And as I told you, the Dubai Land Department produce a monthly index on the performance of the residential market. So also, I'm talking about the controls in the model. So oil prices is also, although Dubai has a little oil, but still the spillover impact is there. So it could be an important determinant of the external demand coming from the region. And so we collected data on the crude price. It's important to have some sort of population size. So some rough, it's a bit debatable. As a proxy for population size, we collected the number of mobile subscription in the UAE. So the number of people having mobile lines. And our data can be described as a long panel data. So long panel data means that the number of T is much larger than the number of N. So we have monthly data on two groups of properties, the leverage one and the non-leverage one. So about, as I said, it's about less than 100. And we do the differences because you have a long panel in terms of, means that the time dimension is a bit long. Then this issue of time series, you have to take it into account, although it's in panel data, so stuff like stationarity and other concerns that arises from time series nature, you need to do the difference. So I lose about 12 observation because I'm doing it year on year. Then I lost 12 observation, so it goes down to 86 months, starting January 2015. And in this case, I used the generalized GLS model, generalized least squares, with a fixed effect, as well as I have to include the term AR1 and so on to include for the time AR1 disturbance term to control for the large T. So you see here is more detailed in the model. So as I told you, the outcome variable is the number of transactions. So it's more or less, this is a sort of demand model. So because of the number of transactions is large and easy of interpretation, I take it in log terms, and I difference all the variables that can be difference. And my mean variable is US interest rate. And also I take the difference, the year-on-year difference, difference in oil price, difference in the prices of Dubai prices, difference in rent, the COVID impact, also a dummy variable, because I'm taking year-on-year. There is this base effect in the year after, because suddenly during the COVID people couldn't go and watch the properties or so it is likely there will be a rebound after the COVID, so you need to control for this. So I include a variable called the base year effect. And as I told you, I control for as a proxy for population size, I control for the number of landline, number of mobile lines. Also, I do an interaction term because I suggested about this exchange rated channel. So this interaction term between the mortgage and the mortgage dummy. So you have a dummy, so controlling for the vector of mortgages, multiplied by the change in interest rate. So basically, this can tell me if the impact is driven by the mortgage rates or is it driven by other channels. That could be the exchange rate channel, right? So this is the most two important policy spillovers that come from. So you can see here, if I just chart a simple chart, so the real estate transaction versus the US interest rate. So on the left is the cash market or the sales market, and on the right you see the mortgage market versus the US interest rate. So it is obvious in the case of the cash market that the as the negative correlation between the US interest rate and the real estate transaction level or the market activity. You can see the negative correlation, this up, this down, this down, this up. If you look to the mortgage market and US interest rate, you see the impact is a bit, the relation is not visually clear. And this is something we can inspect from the models. So I used different regression forms. So as I told you, it's a long panel data, so I'm using fixed effect. As you know, you may control for the nature type of buyers between mortgage and cash markets. Sometimes the banks have certain areas that you can allow to get a finance from. Maybe the mortgage buyer are more limited in their budget. Maybe there are some conditions and looking for more certain type of properties that is more medium size, and maybe the cash market you have a different type of buyers who can have the payments ready and maybe looking for more luxurious properties. So there might be some systematic differences. Be nice to account for by the fixed effect. And so you have, this is the different types of models. So the fixed effect, the generalized least square, the OLS correlation for disturbance term. And basically I see a significant impact always coming from the US interest rate on the real estate transactions. So you have always negative and highly significant at 1% level of significant impact. Even the impact, the rent, you can see it also follow my prediction. And what is interesting, I want to highlight here is also the interaction term was not significant. So I see concluding that the impact is not coming from the mortgage market. It's coming from the cash market and sales market. And as I explained to you, the impact of the exchange rate of appreciation of the dollar is much stronger than the impact of the 1% increase in the interest rate. When the US increases its interest rate, the US dollars gets stronger and impacting other buyers from other countries. So that is more robustness check. So sometimes I change the exchange interest rate from the US interest rate to the IBOR rate. I did the regression on levels instead of differences. But always the results are quite strong, and it holds regardless of type of model. Standard errors are clustered across different to account for it. So the substantial rise in U.S. interest rate and the appreciation of the U.S. dollars seems to have a significant spillover effect on the borrowing cost of emerging markets. And of course, this is for the globe, yani. It's the debt burden on emerging markets are increasing, as we have been hearing yesterday. And generally, our finding is in line with the literature. The previous literature, of course, finds that the U.S. interest rate has a negative impact on the housing. Contribution of the paper a bit move from the time series analysis that is commonly used in the literature and represent some departure and breaking down the properties by the type of transaction and so on, and also to focus on a market that is really rarely has been studied. And also we think the exchange rate is likely the pass-through which the US monetary policy spills to Dubai housing markets. So as I said, in the US dollars versus and the dirham consequently have appreciated by 22% against other currencies over the last year. And for example, the Japanese yen 13%, the euro appreciated 6%. And of course, that will leave the prices in Dubai is a bit more expensive, although it has a positive impact when it comes to inflation. It's a bit reducing inflation. As the US, it's exporting its inflation to other countries. So the paper is gaining importance in the light of the high rate of inflation around the world, and that causes disruption in supply chains and the Russian war. And the US is aggressively raising its interest rate, although now it's slowing down a bit. And we see a strong inverse relation between the change in the US interest rate and demand for properties in Dubai. So if you, because I put in a long terms, if you translate this into the economic impact, then you will see a 1% increase in the US interest rate is impacting the real estate transaction by 17%. So when it goes up, it goes down by 17%, and when it goes down, then it encourages by 17%. And the study is not in a position to evaluate the exchange rate policy, and it's more just looking into impact on the exchange rate. Generally, the IMF and others support the stability of the exchange rate and as a policy anchor and policy stability. So thank you for your, and final, the paper just has been accepted and now it's in production in the Journal of Housing Markets.
Could you come back to your results actually? How do you interpret the interaction results? The interaction doesn't seem to be significant.
Yeah, this is what I'm suggesting. The interaction results, that it means.
How do you interpret it?
It means that for me, which is important, which means that the impact is not coming from the mortgage impact, it's coming from the cash market, right? So you can buy the house from either leveraging or from you go and put the down payment and buy it directly. So if this interaction term is not significant, it means that the impact is coming from the other channel. So in fact, it's supporting this, what I see in the graph, that the negative correlation here between the US interest rate and mortgage market is less negatively correlated. While if you see here the cash market and the US interest rate, you see the negativity relation is more obvious. So I put the interaction term to find out where the impact is coming from, the mortgage or from the exchange rate.
Is there any financial market regulation loosening? Because there are some loan-to-value ratio restrictions.
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
Are there any changes happening at around that time because they cannot change the interest rate?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there are other ways of loosening the market by changing the loan-to-value ratio and so on.
Well, so after the
Happening at around that time?
yeah, so after the financial crisis, they increased the loan-to-value ratio to curb the real estate bubble and so on. So that has been introduced. I think so the expatriates and they differentiate between the local and expatriates. So I think for the case of the locals, they can get a loan up to 80% of the property and 75% for the case of UAE residents. And so the loan-to-value ratio, and later on, when the COVID happened, they also put a bit more restrictions onto this for the first-time home buyer, not for the whole market, but if you are buying a property for the first time, then they loosen it a bit.
It would be good to control for it. The papers already accepted that probably.
Yeah, well, in fact, when I started this paper, I want to evaluate this policy, not this policy, but I didn't find a significant impact. So I changed a bit the course of the paper to just the US monetary policy. So my original idea was to look at the loan-to-value ratio, but I didn't find that the significant impact, so I changed the course a bit.
It might be telling us a lot about the UAE market by the way, because in many of the countries, the financial markets, the mortgage, the real estate is bought through mortgage owners should be very important. And in recent times also there's a kind of a capital inflow to UAE because of the sanctions related to Russia. And can you also interpret your results in that regard? I mean, especially by considering that the mortgage part is not significant. And also, one more information. At the beginning, you show us some different country individuals. How about the firms? For example, a firm from Russia, they invest in the real estate market, but through a firm, not by individually owning the place, but owning the real estate complex and then getting the return for several different reasons. Can you account for it, or can you see it in your data?
No, my data is not, I don't know who's the buyer, right? So it's nationalities and so on. It's something that they don't publish. Also, I want to highlight that so the paper is focused on residential markets. So it's true that it could be some banks buying properties, the UE banks basically buying UE buildings and then they rent it out. And what else? What was your first point? You said about.
The first point was about this one.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, in fact, what you're suggesting is supported by the finding of the study, right? So you are talking about maybe wealthy people coming from abroad and putting down the money and buying properties and so on. In fact, it's supported by this graph and the result of this study, because I see the impact is coming from the cash market and not from the mortgage market. Those people will not still go to the bank and take a loan, and maybe they don't need it in the first place, right? So they will be less affected by the interest rate and mortgage rate. They will be more affected by the exchange rate, by a matter, for example, how is the Ukrainian currency is affected by or how is the Russian ruble is affected, or how any other currency is affected. So I think the paper finding is in line with this.
Other questions, comments?
Yeah.
You started by saying that you care about non-preferential kind of considerations. It's an important consideration. But since you don't control the exchange rate because it's paid, and the capital account is open, then there is not much that the government can do to change the two driving forces that we have on the price of gas. So how would that, how do you suggest we can go about, because what you don't like is the sudden changes of the monetary policy in the US, right? And the amplified effect it has on the US market. So what do you do?
Yeah, I can reply. In fact, I mentioned it in the paper. So I a bit disagree. There is one or two policies that can be do. So first, if you look at what fees that the Dubai Land Department charge when you buy properties, so it's about 4%, 5%. So that it's a sort of some fiscal policies that you can play with. Maybe in a difficult time, then maybe reduce a bit the fees, the purchase fees that you put it down, right? When you buy, maybe reduce it from 4 to 2% or 3 to 2%, maybe to stimulate the market or to account if the impact of the monetary policy is unfavorable or not in line. That's something. And another suggestion comes from Dr. Ahmed is also maybe loan to value ratio. That is something we can deal with, right? So maybe easing a bit the loan to value ratio. That could be also another policies that I can think of.
So this is sales of new houses or old houses?
All house.
And you pay the fee only for the new house?
No, every transaction, every change of property buyer, you go to the Dubai Land Department, you have to put down 4 or 5% as a fees transaction.
Anyway, congratulations on publication, so it is not a comment, but just when the reviewer asked you, because even the quantitative easing was officially started in 2014 in the US, but later on, for some time, the policy was somehow quantitative, and because the interest rates were very, interest rate in the US was very low. So did the reviewer ask you why you don't use quantitative easing proxy instead of the interest rates?
Well, they said it to 3 reviewers. I don't think it wasn't suggested, yeah, fortunately.
Why didn't I use the AR model instead of to get the pass-through?
Yeah, to get the benefit of fixed effect. So I'm benefiting from both, from controlling for within fixed effects that might arise from different nature of the properties, and also including the AR term 1 and so on. So the time series will be a downgrade to the models that I'm using.
Thank you very much for all the presenters. They were all writing presentations and they will all be published in the sources for various